Chapter 71. Mr. Blue left the lifeboat station, strolled to the center of town. The distinct absence of movement and sound bounced off of the Time Lord's heightened senses. It had looked for a very long time as if the sun refused to move in its orbit overhead. The old Time Lord noted this. He frowned as he took in Sycamore Downs, as now there were no more people, no noise, everything slightly chilly, their air empty and full of ghosts. He knelt and closed his eyes. The Time Lord in the cobalt suit tasted the earth, straightened his tie as he peered straight ahead, slightly, viewing the immediate future. He smiled. Mr. Blue knew where Sully and D3 were about to meet up, although to them it would appear almost as if he had orchestrated it. It was nice to be a Time Lord. Occasionally, after he braced against the brisk ocean air, then made his way onward through the vacancy of the town, eventually Mr. Blue arrived at the northern coast of Sycamore Downs, finding himself at a small harbor which served as the village's fishing and boating center. Minutes later, he saw D3 in the distance, headed toward him, and nearly a gate. On the far side of the harbor, trawlers and other small boats lined the dockside. Due to some strange heat wave, made it impossible to peer through, make out details. As D3 arrived near the Time Lord, he was trying to taste and smell the air in order to analyze this bizarre sea mist, which obscured the far side of the harbor dock. He was unsuccessful, and he appeared keenly aware of it. "What's up, Scrunchy Face?" D3 asked. Sully strolled up to the pair of them.
"Looks like a rogue." "I was about to say that."
Mr. Blue seemed disappointed.
"Really?"
"No." The Time Lord abruptly smiled.
"Go on, Mr. Brontworth. Sully was in the Navy. Did you know that?"
D3 folded her arms.
"No idea."
She glanced at the strange curtain of hazy sea mist which made the other part of the sea invisible. The retired Commodore continued.
"The locals called it a rogue when I was young. Some boys I served with said they witnessed a rogue once they were in the service."
D3 nodded.
"This, sort of thing common?"
Sully lit a cigarette.
"I've never seen one. Mind you, Queen and Country weren't too keen to substantiate any supernatural activities back in."
Mr. Blue snapped his fingers.
"So, no way through one of these in your quaint old human folk tales? A big fish to sing a sea shanty to, perhaps?"
"Hey, listen for a second."
D3 cupped her right ear. Sully took a puff.
"Why do you always insist on interrupting me?"
He exhaled.
"Didn't want to hear about the ribbon you received from the Officers' Club about the 2 Swedish flight attendants again." "That's a good tale, old boy. Gets better every time I—"
D3 raised her voice.
"You two, listen for a damn second."
Mr. Blue cocked his ear briefly.
"I don't—"
"Shush!"
After a moment, the Time Lord in the old blue suit and the retired Commodore both heard the unmistakable clacking of boats knocking against the harbor walls, and somewhere close, but muffled, the faint cries of seagulls.
"Right," Mr. Blue said. "I told you something was going on here."
He listened fully, turning his attention to the trawlers and the ships he could see. Not a sound, no noise, because the water wasn't moving. He turned his attention to the rogue, listening beyond the otherworldly, hazy heat divide, announcing,
"I can hear the boats knocking about the other side of the harbor."
"It's like this whole town is on pause since we came here."
D3 looked at Mr. Blue and Sully nervously.
"We met that lady back at the inn, but besides her, there hasn't been anyone. No cars, no kids, no birds, nothing. Nothing since—"
"That's not entirely true,"
the retired Commodore announced.
"Oh,"
D3 said. Sully cleared his throat.
"I found some donkeys."
"Oh," D3 said.
"Fed 'em. Seemed like they hadn't been tended to in a while."
D3 wrinkled her nose.
"That must be why you smell so weird."
The young Mercurian woman turned her attention back to the Time Lord in the cobalt suit.
"You came here to investigate the time rift, a hole in the fabric of space-time, correct?"
"Indeed, yes."
"I'm sorry, but you just crashed your time capsule into the bottom of the lake. Are you sure you didn't cause all this weirdness?"
D3 placed her hands on her hips. Mr. Blue held up his hands defensively.
Quite, but
The attractive girl pushed herself in his way.
And Sully tells me you're dying. What kind of bullshit is that?
The Time Lord sighed, straightened his tie.
while you were sleeping, Pedge.
Knocked out.
D3 corrected.
Dawn, I thought I was going to die. Relatively confident that I should have. However, I didn't. Instead, we had a mid-vortex temporal collision with an avatar after Pedge turned a quantum tractor beam into an ensnarement device, all while a Dalek from 1944 tried to tear a hole in the fabric of reality to escape the last great time war. We crashed here after colliding with deceit, and I fear...
The Time Lord trailed off. D3 finished Mr. Blue's sentence for him.
You're afraid deceit is here too.
What?
Sully stubbed out his smoke angrily. Mr. Blue leered at the rogue.
I fear that deceit, perhaps, avatars, are both here, somewhere in Sycamore Downs.
D3 looked away from Mr. Blue.
You think you may be responsible for this?
Possibly.
Mr. Blue shouted.
This could have all happened at my hand, yes, or deceit's fault. Where is she? Where's her avatars? Stranded inside Pedge somewhere? Or is the sociopath time lady back in 1944? I don't know, Dawn. What I do know is that we crashed here right as I should have died. I was healed through the Ultron energy, and excess of it.
Sully pointed at the Time Lord.
That's what Pedge runs on.
Mr. Blue kept nodding, angrily.
Instead of regenerating, Pedge crashed me here, with Deceit's temporal essence in tow, lost whereabouts unknown.
He looked over at D3.
So, yes, Dawn, I am dying. Should have died. My ending has been, very much like this village of Sycamore Downs, placed on hold while I make overdue observations. Valiantly remaining a step behind the answers as I desperately try to find out what I can do about all this.
The Time Lord started to storm off, loosening his trademark azure tie. Sully patted D3's arm as Mr. Blue strolled away. He stopped when he noticed she was staring up into the sky, vacantly. The retired Commodore followed her gaze to see 2 seagulls overhead. They were flying in slow motion, wings flapping gracefully, yet extremely slowly. The birds made no advancement, however. These seagulls were stuck in place, flying nowhere as their infinitely slowed, moaning cries echoed sickeningly across the road. Mr. Blue noted how still, quiet, and moist the chilly air continued to be as he walked from the harbor back to the center of Sycamore Downs, with Sully randomly reciting naval ghost tales involving the rogue. D3 followed the pair, opting not to probe the irritable old Time Lord about his mortality. The entire town was vacant, everyone gone. There was not a sound through the streets as the wind gusted cold, whipping through. The absence of noise of children or pedestrians or traffic became stifling. Farther from the harbor, toward Main Street, was the town green, also known as the town square. It served as an acreage for a year-round, small-scale circus. The Time Lord in the cobalt suit was visibly bored, as Sully explained to D3 that those who lived in Great Britain referred to them as resident fun fairs. An American, he stated, would call one a circus. The dusk carnival of delirium was imposing, creaking, an ancient fairground which sat overlooking the beach in the distance. Mr. Blue stood beside Sully and D3 at the entrance. All through the carnival were rides: a cyclone, a Ferris wheel, spinning teacups, a log flume, bumper cars, and a ghost train. The typical creaks and squeals of the metal and wood of the rides echoed in the background, the usual cacophony one expected at a fair. All of the lights were on. All booths were open for business. All the rides were running. They hurtled at full speed, then stopped to let passengers on or off. Yet at this carnival, there was no one on board.
Nobody is on the rides,
D3 stated flatly.
or operating them.
Mr. Blue stepped away from his companions, his form of saying,
Spread out.
D3 wandered over to the bumper cars, watching them as they aimlessly lolled about. The second she stepped onto one of the bumper cars, however, the entire ride seemed to speed up, become more alive as the lights grew in intensity. The young Mercurian woman was tossed about and slammed mercilessly by an onslaught of menacing bumper cars, some of which lined up for the opportunity to knock the attractive companion about a bit. She jumped for her life, out of breath by the sudden childlike violence which was horrendously amplified in this carnival's version of bumper cars. Sully had just finished laughing at D3 when his attention was abruptly hijacked by the entrance of the ghost train. It was foreboding, dark, freezing. It made Sully feel unsettled how rickety it was. The retired Commodore was more unsettled by just how badly he wanted to go inside. A slap on the back from his Time Lord friend woke him up from his horrific reverie.
I sense it too,
Mr. Blue said casually.
There is a signal. Coming from inside.
D3 caught up to the two old men as they stood in front of the kid's spooky house ride and looked petrified. She almost smiled, but stopped when she thought about how bloodthirsty the bumper cars were.
What kind of signal?
Sully asked.
Signal?
D3 repeated. Mr. Blue ignored her.
It's psychic radiation. Very unusual. I can't pinpoint it. What the signal's purpose is, out here.
Think that's why Sycamore Downs is empty? Everyone told to evacuate?
We're not going in there,
D3 said. Mr. Blue tilted his head.
A psychic radiation residue pulse would explain your desire to depart, yet also the feeling.
Guys?
Sully grimaced.
Feeling like I need to go inside? Have to, for whatever reason.
Please tell me we're not going in there,
D3 protested.
So I guess you know what comes next then?
The Time Lord in the cobalt suit asked the retired Commodore.
Right, old boy.
Sully sighed.
You have to go in there.
D3's mouth dropped open.
You're going in there? Into the ghost train?
What's wrong with that?
Are you serious? The name Ghost Train doesn't...
Mr. Blue smiled as he interrupted.
Some time ago I realized that the chaos of injustice in my experience made me angry, made me cynical. What I didn't know was that my anger and my cynicism had made me part of the problem.
D3 shook her head.
I don't understand.
Not anymore. Inexplicably, my life was saved. I don't have the luxury of being afraid, of not choosing the road less traveled, of not diving in without looking. I don't have to run away. However, I am running out of time. Before I go, I am going to make damn sure I set everything right.
Before he entered into what was certainly going to be dangerous and terrifying, his companion saw the glimmer in his eye when Mr. Blue taunted.
Besides, I ain't afraid of no ghost.